Dark now, you better take it easy a little bit.
All right, welcome back. It is after lunch on Wednesday, the 22nd. And we are here on H-157. Representative Bloomley, would like to join us. H-157 is the bill that we promised was coming when we took testimony on the basic needs budget and the livable wage budget. And we had Ellen Kaler and Dickerson come and do and did his annual biennial report. And Ellen had provided us with a history of this process that we're talking about. This bill is the next step towards. We talked about this when we had the conversation earlier about having a summer committee, a summer task force, whatever it's called in the bill, to redo this process. And so this is the bill. Welcome, Representative. You know all of us.
I do actually. So hi.
Won't go around in circles and
You can, but it's not necessary.
welcome.
Yeah, thank you. So I see that we have Ledge Council here. So perhaps you would like Damien to walk.
Damien will do the walkthrough.
Great. Okay. Well, I'll just provide them the context. So when I was at Vermont Works for Women, we provided training for women to get jobs, mostly in non-traditional careers. And one of the things that we used in order to determine kind of where we would provide that training, what we would provide training for people to do, we looked to the basic needs budget. What does it take if you are a family, if it's just you, or if it's you and a child, or if you and your partner and a child? I mean, there are, I think, 7 different categories of family. And, what would it take to support you? And then we compared that to kind of the states published average wages for different field. And that would factor into our decisions about what we were providing training for. So the basic needs budget and the livable wage reports that come out every 2 years were really important in understanding, how many people actually earn that much, and what do we need to be shooting for as employers, since I was a nonprofit employer and we had about 20 employees, or, the employers with whom we worked. So I know you heard testimony, as the chair said, from Ellen Kaler from the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund. It was her early work at the Peace and Justice Center that on the wage gap studies, that was a series of reports that kind of culminated in the basic needs budget. And I have always been a huge fan of Ellen's, and I'd like to thank you for one of your many legacies. I've talked with Ellen, and I have talked with Chair Stevens and with JFO about the need to really look again at the methodology through which they come up with the basic needs budget. It hasn't gone through a major overview since 2008. And people's habits change, family structures change, their prices of certain kinds of things change, the mix of our activities, trends in insurance, all the things. Every once in a while, it is a good idea. And in fact, JFO said in its last report, the Joint Fiscal Office strongly recommends that the General Assembly consider the appointment of another technical advisory committee to comprehensively review, possibly recommend updates to the statute and methodology. These kinds of technical updates are, I think, really important because things change. And so I hesitate to say this because you always would laugh when anybody said, this is a simple bill.
And here we are.
And here we are. But I do think it's a pretty straightforward, simple bill. It proposes, well, who would be part of this advisory committee and what would they do? And what is the process for making recommendations for any changes, et cetera? And it outlines the kinds of things that one would, that we would want that group to consider. So is that enough of a context?
I think it is, and I want to just bring out, there was a question that came up last year after the session was, why can't we just do this in joint fiscal committee? And so joint fiscal committee, when it meets, it's reacting to things that come up, mostly financial expenditures that are based on the bills that we've passed. And the reason this didn't get included in and we had a conversation about this, is that as simple as it is for technical changes, something like this is political. And so we do, the General Assembly, the legislature has to do this rather than leaving it to the system or I don't want to call them, I don't mean functionaries in a bad way, but non-elected officials, apolitical officials, because this work and what we end up voting on is a choice. It's a political choice of what to include and what not to include. And so that's the only piece of this right off the top of my head that's not simple. I just wanted to throw that out there, that this was something that some people felt like it could be just handled in a quick way, but after consultation with various people, it was clear that it's not just purely technical, that there are these elements.
Mm-hmm.
And then once that's said, and JFO was very clear about this over the years, this number is not political. This is based on the protocols that we put forward, but it's not to be used, and they don't want to be in a position of saying this is what a minimum wage should be or a policy choice should be.
Right.
They're just providing us with a number based on the data that we asked them to provide. That's how simple it is.
Yes. And I think that there are things that, so it's important to have pretty broad representation of perspective on that group. And I think that it does. At any rate, I hope that you will embrace this. And I will turn it over to Ledge Counsel, I guess, to walk you through the bill.
Representative Chestnut.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's
Yeah.
a comment rather than a question, and it's for all concerned parties. But whenever I would look at, what is, mostly it would be in relation to a livable wage information. I always wanted and couldn't find the information. So in that category of two adults sharing housing with insurance paid for by their employers, no children, so how many people are in that category?
Mhm.
As opposed to how many are in the other categories?
Right.
Just so I have some idea.
Yeah.
That,
And I think that is the kind of question that this committee would want to look at, because they're painting a picture of Vermont as they're doing their work, right?
Right.
Because, because they kind of need to do that analysis in order to understand, well, does that tell us anything?
and when we pick one number to represent, how many people does that actually
Yes,
hit?
yes,
That's my comment.
yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah, the straightest part of the information is the tax table, which is only one page of 4 but it's just, that gives you an idea of how many people make less than. If you follow it through, you can tell who filed married. You can tell how many exemptions, but it's not, there's still many levels below it in order to get to this.
Yeah, and, it does take into account kind of the benefits cliff and there's an urban, rural clarification and family structure clarification. So, but anyway, I have found it a very useful reference again and again. And I think that in order to ensure that it's really relevant to the work that we're doing, I think we need to just step back and take a look at it again. So, anyway,
Thank you so much.
thank you very much.
Go back to the appropriations world.
I'm going to go to my cave.
I didn't want to call it.
I know you did, and yet, I think I left my mug here. Oh.
Next to the
That's
fridge.
my mug. Thank you for reuniting me. Okay. All right.
Bye.
Thanks for all your work.
See ya.
Okay.
All right, Damien, welcome back.
Thank you. Nice to see everyone again. It's been a long time.
Yeah, we're changing tracks here.
Can we sit in?
Yeah, got it.
Hey,
We passed out 866 today, no problem.
that's where I'm heading after this, so,
We won't keep going.
yeah, no, I have till after the floor, so, that's a nice break. So, the bill in front of you, H-157, basically it's a two-section bill, the section that sets up the advisory committee and the effective date. So, this would create the technical advisory committee on the basic needs budget. The membership of the committee would be comprised of two current members of the House, appointed by the Speaker, not from the same political party, two members of the Senate, not from the same political party, appointed by the Committee on Committees, Director of the Vermont Department of Labor, Division of Economic and Labor Market Information or designee, so Matt Barowitz or Matt's designee, the Secretary of Human Services or designee, a member appointed by the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund, and a member appointed by the Society for Human Resources Management, Vermont State Council, and one member appointed by Capstone Community Action. So the state appointees, so numbers 1 through 4, those are, so Human Services deals with a lot of the benefits issues. Labor Market Information has information on wages and the workforce. The members of this body obviously have policymaking authority and input. The 3 members appointed from outside the state, the executive and legislative branches of state government here. So the Sustainable Jobs Fund, Society for Human Resources Management, and Capstone Community Action were chosen by the sponsor. Obviously, with all 7 of these appointees, you can make policy decisions as to who should be on this advisory commission and who shouldn't. The duties of the commission are to honor before November 1 of this year. They have to study the topics set forth in subdivision B and submit a written report to the Joint Fiscal Committee with their findings and recommendations for the revisions of the methodology for determining the basic needs budget. In preparing the report, they're required to study the current methodology and determining what constitutes a livable wage for the 7 household configurations that are included in it. Potential changes to the methodology and determining what constitutes a livable wage for those household configurations. Potential changes to the underlying statute to account for public policy changes, data availability, and other factors that have impacted any aspects of the basic needs budget calculation or the costs to Vermonters of basic needs as it's defined in the statute. And then a year later, the committee is required to submit a written report to the Joint Fiscal Committee that details the committee's findings with respect to an analysis of how many Vermonters earn less than the livable wage as it was reported in January of this year for each of the identified household configurations, with the data further broken down by race. An analysis of the cost to the state of public benefits provided to individuals earning less than the livable wage. An analysis of the benefits cliffs for all public benefits provided to Vermonters, and the impact of increasing the wages of Vermonters who earn less than the livable wage to an amount that is equal to or greater than the livable wage. So that would basically take a look at where are the benefits cliffs, what are people earning below that, how many people, and then let's extrapolate out if wages got pushed up, what would the impacts be? And there's some discretion there, but the analysis should examine impacts on the benefits available, the impact on the state's tax revenues, the impact on the state's expenditures for public benefits, and any impacts on the state's eligibility to receive federal funding related to the public benefits programs. So
question. Well, first of all, this is more than just this bill is more than just changing the methodology. This is recreating or the original report in essence. It's I mean, the original report from 98 or 99 would not be, I mean, it may not be the same, but it's that idea of taking a look at what it means to look at these numbers.
yeah, so this does two things. The first report, the report for this November, is how should the methodology be updated? The second report is looking more at what are the impacts if people started earning the livable wage as it was reported this past January. So with an updated methodology that may no longer quite line up, but it's looking back at that and saying, what would the impacts be on the state? How many people are we talking about? And then what are the impacts on benefits available to those people who earn less than the livable wage currently? Is it going to impact tax revenues? Is it going to impact expenditures? And one thing that we found when we did the last look at the benefits cliffs for the minimum wage study a few years back is that changing wages can actually affect federal dollars coming into the state. So there's a lot of different things. And that's what this is basically asking for, is for a more nuanced look that focuses on that instead of the last report was focused on that whole question of what should a minimum wage be increased to in Vermont. And so this would be focused more on the basic needs budget and livable wage determinations and how, if people were actually earning that, what would the net impact be across the state?
And would it be fair to say that one of the difficulties in this kind of analysis or with respect to the benefits cliff is that federal numbers, for instance, the levels of poverty change very little, if at all, over time, whereas we're talking about incomes that go up. So we're still being measured. We're measuring this increase even without, I mean, we're seeing an increase, right? There was a reported increase in the livable wages here, but that's still being compared to one reason there's a benefits cliff is that other number doesn't change. Am I thinking correctly?
I don't know if I'm the best qualified to actually talk about the federal poverty numbers because I don't work with them. So I think I'm gonna let one of the other folks in the room who works with that more talk about that.
Okay.
Are there other aspects to that question?
No, it's part of our policy when we talk about things like benefits cliffs, about the difficulty of making these. I mean, what this is addressing is how difficult it can be to create policy based on these particular factors when, at least in my mind right now, one element is changing faster than the other, and we're comparing older numbers with new, it's just an explanation of why. It's not an explanation, it's just an exposition of what is so difficult about policymaking in this issue area.
Right. And just maybe to pause and back up, does everyone on the committee know when I say benefits cliff, is that a term everyone's familiar with? Okay. Just wanted to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing and that I'm not just having an offline conversation with the chair here.
That's good.
This was a simple little bill until we started talking about the benefits cliff.
Right. I mean, anytime you start looking at that, that's a complicated issue. And there are a lot of factors there that are outside of our control. There are federal, income thresholds and so forth, that the state doesn't necessarily have control over in some instances. And there's budgetary concerns and it gets more complicated. I think the simple part of this bill is that it's just asking for a study. The complicated part is potentially that the policy questions that raises. So moving on, the committee is required to take testimony from subject matter experts to assist with data analysis and methodological considerations, and to take testimony from a variety of stakeholders, including employers and employees. It's worth noting here that testimony could include having a subject matter come in and provide the committee with their analysis of a certain discrete issue or something like that. The committee has administrative, technical assistance from JFO, technical assistance from the Department of Labor's Economic and Labor Market Information Division, and legal assistance from the Office of Legislative Counsel. So reality, what does that mean? That means that Dan and his colleagues from JFO and the folks from Labor Market Information would be doing a lot of economic analysis and assistance with the numbers. And Leg Counsel would be providing underlying assistance with statutory language and possibly drafting the report or any recommended legislation.
Representative Burrows.
Thank you. I just have a really tiny question. And that is that at the very beginning, as I'm scribbling things down, you said commission.
Let me see, I keep referring to it as a commission. And I think it is a committee throughout. I just keep saying commission.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
The first meeting would be called by JFO on or before August 15th because they have a tight timeline. Committee would select a chair from among its members. A majority would be a quorum. And the committee would cease to exist on January 30th of 2025. So that's 2 years from now. And why January 30th instead of the 31st? Because it's my birthday. And so I always set it for probably shouldn't say that on YouTube, but anyway, too late. So for compensation and reimbursement, the members would receive per diem compensation and reimbursement as if this were an out of session meeting of a committee. Non-legislative members would receive the $50 a day plus reimbursement if they're not state employees. It's important to note that right now it says for not more than 5 meetings. That would apply total through 2025. I would have to touch base with Representative Blumley, but I think the intent was 5 meetings annually. And just missed that in the editing process. But that's something you just want to flag if you're thinking of making
Well, the
amendments.
first 5 meetings have to be about the work on changing the formula, and the second 5 meetings would be the analysis of the,
Right.
in essence.
Yeah, so it'd be, 5 meetings in 2023 and 5 in 2024, essentially. The Appropriations, there's $7,000 appropriated to the General Assembly for fiscal years 24 and 25 for the per diem compensation and reimbursement of expenses for members of the committee. I would defer to the Joint Fiscal Office regarding whether that is just right or too much. Definitely worth just checking. That was just a round number that I put in there. And the sum of $10,000 is appropriated to JFO for costs related to retaining experts and other services that they provide to the committee. So if they need to hire an outside consultant or outside services, they can do that. Again, I would defer to JFO regarding whether that amount is appropriate. And effective date is July 1.
So just to be clear on the process between 2023 and 2025, 2023 would be taken up to redo the formula.
Yep.
2024 would not only have, would this committee would have the duty to write the report, which is due towards the end of the year. And at that time, that's when JFO is using the new formula for their calculations, which are then presented again in January of 2025. The reason to do this on a biennial basis, and this, we got hung up on this a couple of years ago, was this gives them time to redo the formula in time for the next report.
So, and one other thing to note is you'll have noticed that this didn't recommend legislation to update the formula. The committee could, but the Joint Fiscal Committee does have authority to adopt modifications to the methodology on its own under the current statute. So unless they see a need for legislation to make further changes to the statute, they can adopt the methodology updates without any further action from this committee.
Thank you for the clarification.
Okay.
Questions for Damien? Questions about, yes, Representative Parsons?
Thanks. Just that last section you said. So if they felt the work that was done made sense to change, they could do it on their own, not just the work that will be done will be their new model.
No, they still have the decision. Yeah, so
Okay.
the Joint Fiscal Committee is basically been delegated authority by the General Assembly to decide on what the methodology is and to adopt updates on their own action. So they still have to have a vote. They're not bound by what the committee recommends. So if the committee came back with a recommendation that they thought was completely off base, they could just say, no, we're only adopting, recommendations 1 and 2, not the rest.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
All right, committee, we're gonna take testimony on Tuesday from 2 folks who are in the room already, just to follow up on this proposal and barring any kind of real opposition to this, I don't know that we need to do a lot of time on this. This is setting up a committee, and so perhaps we can vote on it before we go away for town meeting, but that we'll see better on Tuesday where we are. I'm going to consider putting annually in there as a substantive change. But yes, if you could check in with JFO about what their costs may be, I think the costs are probably just about right for the people who are put on there. And I think we'll hear from the witnesses on Tuesday about why those people would be right for the committee. Further questions?
Yeah, just a clarification on the costs. Is that $7,000 and $10,000 in each of the 2 years, or that's the 2 years?
It's for the 2 years. So $17,000 total for 2 years of work by this committee.
Okay.
Okay. Great. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Ron, do you have? You gave me that stuff. Thanks, Dan.
Bye, Damien.
Have a good one, guys.
Yeah, next up will be at 2:15 with the walkthrough of H111. And given that we just have 45 minutes for that, we'll just try to hear it through rather than breaking it apart right now. Do you have Thursday?
We do.
Can you review what's going on Thursday?
Thursday morning at 9:15, we'll be hearing from Pathways Vermont, both about their program and their budget request. We have an invitation out at 10:15, representatives from Rights and Democracy who wanted to come in last week, but we didn't have time. So we've offered them a slot tomorrow morning, waiting to hear back. Then from 11:15 to 1, we will have Commissioner Josh Hanford from the Department of Housing and Community Development. He'll be speaking to the workforce housing bill, H111, but also generally about the budget, the housing sections of the budget. And he's got several things of a departmental nature that he wants to talk to the committee about. Just we never really had a proper introduction with him, and so he's got a list of things to talk to us about. So we're giving him that opportunity. Then at 2:15, Sarah Carpenter will be in. She's the chair of the Rental Housing Advisory Board, and she'll be speaking to the rental housing registry that's in H276. That is tomorrow.
All right, well, let's,
Do you want me to see if Ellen and David are free?
I suppose so. Yeah. Yeah, see if they're free. Or one of them, or. So let's take 5 right now and come back at 5 of, and we'll see where. If they're not available till their scheduled time, then we'll take that break until 2:15, but let's just give Ron a couple minutes to try to contact them. Go off live for 5 minutes.